Is 2024 is whether going to be this year's or last year's?
It's activated, but we need to get it motivated. And he told me just look at the data, separate it out, and
Let's start with the word curative.
Yeah.
If we could first.
Go for it.
So Missouri, and I got to admit, that's probably been one of the drier areas that of the state, and yet here we got tar spots show up in the last week.
The bump is real. So,
welcome to the MFA Made for Agriculture podcast. Here are your hosts, Adam Jones and Cameron Horine.
All right, folks, welcome to another episode of the Made for Agriculture podcast. My name is Adam Jones.
And I'm Cameron Horine.
And today we're covering kind of a timely, back to a normal episode today, we're covering kind of a timely agronomy topic. We talk a lot about kind of that in-season, in-field management, right? We want to manage that growing crop through the season. So I like taking kind of deep dives into certain growing periods or certain time frames of our crop as we're growing it across our trade territory. So today we're definitely going to do that kind of deep dive. I know I always say that this because I'm the one that typically lines up the guests, but we've got the right people in the room, right? So I'll say that again today. We've got the right people in the room to talk about kind of that mid to late season crop management in corn and soybeans. We're going to go into some other things as well. But in the room with us, we've got Brian Norton and Brandon Nystrom, both with Syngenta. So why don't you guys kind of give us a little background biography and kind of what your role with Syngenta is?
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate the opportunity to be here with you guys today. So Brian Norton, Agronomic Service Representative with Syngenta Crop Protection. Been with the company going on about 28 years now, working eastern Kansas as well as the state of Missouri from a technical and agronomy standpoint. So I've got 5 sales reps that I support that cover that geography. And working a lot with our new products and agronomic training and training of our customers. Work very closely with MFA and appreciate the opportunity to be here today.
Yeah. Thanks, Brian.
Yep, Brandon Nystrom, same sort of role as Brian here, ASR. Work here out of Columbia, Missouri. Manage the Columbia Growmore site. Have a unique role, too, where I have a little bit of sales territory up in north central Missouri and then cover kind of the northeast portion of the state. Have some unique opportunities to partner with MFA and gives us unique insight to just being able to work together and come up with agronomic solutions. So appreciate you guys having us on.
Yeah. No, I appreciate both of you guys being here today. So the first thing I want to know, and you mentioned it, Brandon, you guys have what you call Growmore sites. I believe you both manage one. So for folks that don't know, kind of tell me what that looks like, what that means in your world, and kind of what you guys want to set up for folks to see at those sites.
Yeah, I can go first, Brian. So I have a site here in Columbia, Missouri, just south of town. Hopefully some of you folks have been to it before, but we've got about 8 acres. And really, it was kind of my first introduction. I've been with Syngenta 3 years now. It was kind of my first introduction to Syngenta and getting a look at it with my predecessor who managed that site. And it's kind of was really what inspired me to come over to Syngenta and just to get a chance to be out in the field and see all the trials and all the programs and everything that was going on out there. There's a combination of things we do. There's part of it is education. Part of it is, we'll call it research. Is that fair, Brian? And then part of it's maybe even just some goof plots where we're trying to learn and put kind of where the rubber meets the road, so to speak. We're trying to experiment and bring what we talk about with customers to life. And so from bare ground trials to fungicide to seed care, it's a little bit of everything, and we can tailor those conversations we have in the field to the specific grower. And honestly, each year is a little bit different. Each year we have different things to talk about out there. It seems like we just met with our team this afternoon to go over some events and planning and future things we're looking at. And it's a unique experience because as the weather changes and as timing changes and products change, there's always something to talk about. So it's a great educational opportunity for me. I learn from it. It's how I've trained myself, and it's how I've had Brian help train me on products and everything out there as well. So it's a unique experience.
Yeah, that's a big thing. We call them grow more experiences, and to me, those are really 2 different things. Grow more. So obviously, how do we grow more bushels? Mm-hmm. How do we help customers grow more bushels of corn and soybeans? How do we work with our retail partners to help communicate that message and showcase the opportunity to grow more bushels? And with that, it's an experience. So you mentioned research. I think of it more of a demo plots. Where we get to get out and experience how the products work. So it's a good opportunity to not only look at agronomics, but even Syngenta's product line, some of the competitive comparison standards that are in these blocks, and look at even new products that we're bringing to the marketplace. Maybe giving a grower or retailer an opportunity to gain confidence on a new product before they have to pay their hard-earned money to use that product on their farm.
Yeah. No, I would agree with what you're saying. I know from a personal experience, it's one thing to, look at little pictures of stuff on the back of some one pager, right? It's different when you can kind of touch it and feel it, like what you guys are dealing with. So tell me about kind of what you've got going out there at your all sites for this year, and then maybe I know we've had some weather challenges in certain places, so not exactly sure. Well, I know where yours is at, Brandon, but you can kind of tell me maybe what you've seen maybe because of those weather challenges this year.
Yeah, when you start, so Brandon's got the site here in Columbia, Missouri.
Yep.
I've got what I call a sister site, so it's a very similar site down in Iola, Kansas, so southeast Kansas. Similar size and scope, protocols are pretty similar, but protocols are written to match our local cultural practices and agronomics from a planting date standpoint, spraying date standpoint, that kind of thing. So it is interesting and neat to look at these products perform in different weather environments, for an example. So you think about this current year, even in Iola, we were very dry, May through June. And you compare that and contrast that to last year, and you got a chance to look at products in April and May when we were pretty wet. Mm-hmm. So how does the same product perform under different characteristics? And you begin to see the real qualities of that product. Plus, we get an opportunity to look at products. Most of our work is done in 10-foot wide blocks, 60 to 80 feet long. So we get an opportunity to look at one product right next to another product, 10 feet away, and get to compare how those products work and perform. One of the real popular things is the herbicide bare ground trials. There's no better way to compare a herbicide treatment than to spray it 10 feet wide by 60 foot long. Don't plant any crop out there for shading benefit, and maybe throw some weed seed out there too, just to see how it works. And that's really popular with a lot of folks to come out and look at different products and how they perform.
This is also how we train our folks internally too, is we get them a chance to go out there. And you mentioned, kind of getting to see things in the field. And I'm a visual learner. So, you show me a slide and you tell me, hey, product XYZ is the greatest thing since sliced bread. I may say, yeah, that's great, but it's not going to really hit home until we actually can visualize that in the field. And so when you get someone out there who can visualize that in the field, like maybe you're building a product, you've got a pre-mixed product that you're building with a single AI next to the single AI load, and maybe there's 2 or 3 in there, and you show how one herbicide is catching certain weed species versus the other one that maybe not, and catching a different set of weeds. That's a really neat story, how you can build products onto that. And so we use that for training. I train myself I learn something about every time I go out there. We went out there today, it'd been a week, and I was already picking up things that I was like, wow, I hadn't seen that before. So it's a unique opportunity, and it's how we learn.
Well, we get to see them in real life scenarios. Mentioned it's been pretty dry out, and there's a lot of residual herbicides used in the Missouri geography, Eastern Kansas geography, and unfortunately, to make residual herbicides work well, we need adequate rainfall and consistent adequate rainfall. Something we haven't gotten a lot of this year. So you get sometimes questions about, wow, why did I even invest my money in that residual herbicide? I don't think it did me any good. This is an opportunity where we've got untreated check right next to a treatment. Does the treatment look beautiful? No, probably not. Not this year. But compared to the untreated, it's a significant decrease in weed pressure.
Correct.
Can I give a specific example there too? Just
Absolutely.
Something we looked at today, because as Brian said, we've really struggled in parts of the state, with herbicide activation. And or what do they say? They say it's activated, but we need to get it motivated, I think is what I was told this spring. So, but at the Growmore site here in Columbia this year, we put the residuals down. We didn't get an activating rain for about 10 days afterwards. So when we finally did get that activating rain, there were a few little weeds coming up. What I did was in a 60-foot block, I went ahead and sprayed Liberty herbicide post on 30 foot of that block and kind of cleared it up a little bit, recharged that side of the plot. And the difference we're seeing between when the herbicides got activated on both sides of those blocks and the size of the weed and the scope of the weeds is quite incredible. And it tells a powerful story in how we talk about residuals and just the overall message there. So we're really excited to share that message with folks this summer as they come out and join us.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and I would say, from my perspective, what I would say, I've worked with Brian and Brandon both for a long time on these Growmore sites, and Brett before Brandon was there. And, we've been a good partner with Syngenta. They've been a good partner with us. We've helped them out on the Grow More site, but also they've helped us out at our replicated sites that we've talked about here on the podcast before. And the nice thing, I feel like they complement each other really well. So we've talked about our plots where we do a lot of trial and research testing to make sure products, that we want to bring in for us. There's, like Brian said, there's a lot of demo stuff. And from our perspective, we don't do a lot of herbicide work just because that's not our forte. We're trying to look at products that are working. And so being able to go and experience those bare ground studies, those herbicide trials that they're putting out there is really beneficial. Like Brandon just mentioned, and also last year the same. When we think about some of these residuals that are dependent on water, their water solubility, and being able to see the difference of, hey, when you have moisture, when you don't have moisture, and how that makes an impact. Those are some stories that don't get necessarily told all the time out in the field unless you can see them. And so that's one of the great things I think from the Grow More from the years I've been going there.
Well, and you start looking for consistency, right, Cameron? Is it last year's weather? Is 2024's weather going to be this year's or last year's? You tell me. We can't really know that. So that's one of the things when we start thinking about building consistently performing products for the Missouri market, things like Acuron herbicide for corn, layering in multiple sites of action, multiple active ingredients with different physical properties to try to be more consistent. So we do appreciate your guys' help, both at Columbia and at Iola. You guys are very much involved in both those sites.
Yeah. No, I know they're neat places, and I know just from my short amount of experience in helping Cameron or working around our small plot research stuff, those sites, I don't care if you want to call it research or demo, it's expensive is what it is. And so you just from an educational aspect and the ability for you guys to get folks out there to see agronomic decisions as they happen, I definitely appreciate that commitment. I guess other than, and you may have already spilled the beans as far as taking a look at the residuals in the the herbicide residuals in the dry weather that we've had, but I was going to ask you kind of what's one trial or one demo that you're super excited about for this year?
Well, it's hard to pick just one. That's like picking out a favorite candy. I guess for me, I always really enjoy the bare grounds are where that's our bread and butter and where we just make a lot of our products. So starting from scratch, just walking through, we'll just take like the Group 15s, for example. You think of Group 15 herbicides. Some folks, I think of them as just all one and the same thing. But when you can show differences, and moisture plays a big role in that, yep. And it shows in a year where you don't have a lot of it, you have some of those Group 15 herbicides are going to perform at a different level than others on different weed species versus a wet year. So I can go back 3 years ago and look at the pictures I have from then and in a wet situation versus a dry year like this, and it changes each year. So I think me being able to connect with people on that level to show, hey, there's key differences in all of this, and then how we build that out is, as Brian had alluded to, with like building an Acuron herbicide platform, and even some of the newer products we'll talk about here in a bit. That's where it's a lot of fun for me, is to show what each individual ingredient is bringing to the market, and then how it reacts in a certain environment. So that's what I'm looking forward to.
So at Iola, Kansas, we've got a little bit of a unique marketplace in that we'll have an early bean market. Some guys will plant beans in April through first part of May, but there's also a pretty heavy double crop soybean market as well, where they're not planting soybeans until mid to late June. So we've got a new seed treatment for soybeans called Cruiser Max Apex that we launched this year. And getting to see that product perform, because we have early planted soybeans at the site, and as well as in a double crop soybean perspective. So that's been probably the demo for me that's been the most well attended, and folks are interested in seeing, is no matter which time frame they're planting those beans, to get that type of early season vigor, better stand improvement out of that product. So, and then we do other things there too around agronomics. So we try to do some planter demos relative to population and depth and speed, and you want to get some growers invested in a period of time at a demo. Do something with the planter. It seems like that's been a very popular stop as well.
Sure, because that's touchy-feely, and it's something that they can really resonate with, right? I mean, we can have herbicide conversations. We all love those. But from a grower perspective, right, that's more in your all's hands. That's more in our hands as far as what's going out there. when you start talking about the planter and those mechanical things that I can turn a wrench and adjust and do those kind of things, it's like, oh, well, hey, I can go home and make a change in 20 minutes and have an effect, that I can see here. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
And one thing I'll add to that too is obviously we are showcasing Syngenta's product portfolio, but it's not solely just, hey, let's just give a big sales pitch here. We're
Sure.
focusing on a whole systems approach here. What's working overall? The whole message of overlapping residuals. We have post-timing studies. We have, start from the ground up, like Brian said, from seed treatment trials all the way to populations and so on and so forth. So it's not just only Syngenta products out there.
Yeah. I'd say that's interesting that you chose the seed treatment study to kind of highlight, because that's always I guess fallacy, maybe the correct term, that as you get later in the season, you don't need seed treatment. Or that seems to, I don't even know where that originated, I guess, but that seems to be that kind of seems to be the theme that you hear out there.
Well, you make sense. So if you think about it from a seed treatment perspective, you're really managing early season seedling diseases, right?
Sure.
And the longer that soybean is in that seedling stage, the more susceptible it is to those diseases. Early planted, cooler conditions, it's in that stage a lot longer. So it's more susceptible for a greater period of time. So people think, oh, I need that early planted bean, needs a good seed treatment on it. But really, what we're talking about here is the disease triangle. Yeah. And we got to understand that different soil-borne diseases like different environments. Some like warmer soils, Rhizoctonia, for an example. It's one that we see coming on quite often in our double crop soybeans and can be detrimental. And we still need to protect against it.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. And the diseases, I guess, are soil biology, right? I mean, diseases are biology, just like good stuff is biology. And so as the soil warms up, I mean, I guess one would think you're going to have at least the same or more levels of disease, more levels of that kind of that pathogen in there. So it makes a lot of sense. And I've planted beans late before that weren't treated. We won't go into that, but I won't do that again. So
well, if you think you want to, come out to the Growmore site. I'll show you what might be not.
No, I did it once and learned my lesson, so we're good there. Guys, anything else on the Growmore side? I want to get into kind of a fungicide discussion today and talk a little bit about what's going on out there on the landscape and kind of use of products for this year. Anything else on the Growmore side of things you guys want to talk about?
Well, if you are one of your local MFA retailers, locations out there, or even a grower out there that's interested in seeing the Growmore site, get a hold of your local Syngenta rep. We'd be glad to walk you through that. No matter what time of the year, I always say it, if there's a crop growing, we got something to show.
Yeah.
Because I think you wanted to talk a little bit about fungicides. Some of that stuff, some of those plots, those demos don't really show up well until you get into August and September.
Sure.
So there's always something to see at these Growmore sites.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. Well, thanks for that. So I guess to kind of kick off a fungicide discussion, and you can use product names or you can talk about kind of modes of action. But I think a good starting point might be to just kind of talk about trends in fungicide use. I mean, obviously increasing in both corn and soybeans. So kind of tell me about a modern fungicide product, kind of what it contains and what we're putting it out there trying to accomplish. That's a key up for about a 2-hour answer, I think.
That's a lot. That's a big question for Brian Norton.
Yeah. So Cameron, I was just sitting here thinking, I got a 200 PowerPoint slide presentation just on this exact topic.
I'm sure you do.
Hang on.
We just set him up to be here for 9 o'clock.
Let me pull that thing up. The fun part with Syngenta and the innovation that we've got around products is been working with fungicides 27, 28 years now. And if I look back to some of the technologies that we were using 20 plus years ago, in a lot of cases, Trizol type technology, which was really good for helping manage diseases, stopping diseases once they got started, if you want to think about it that way. Usually short-lived in the plant, short residual. But if you had a disease outbreak, they would usually give you a yield response of some sort. The problem is we don't always have a disease outbreak, talking about the disease triangle, right? The conditions aren't always right. So then as we move through time, we begin to bring a lot of strobilurins into the row crop marketplace. products like Quadris or fungicide, or even Headline fungicide from BASF. And those longer lasting residuals, more preventative type products, but did give you some pretty good residual. The other component that they began to give is this concept of plant health. So efficiency within the plant of water, nutrients, that kind of thing. And when you do that, your consistency of performance goes up, because you can sometimes get a yield improvement or at least a quality improvement of the crop, even if there's not a lot of disease pressure. And so your consistency goes up. Then we started pairing those together, triazoles plus strobilurins. And now here, most recently, the industry over the last 7 or 8 years has gone through the introduction of SDHIs. That's the third mode of action that we deal with. SDHIs are really not new to the industry, but they are new with the new active ingredients we're bringing out. Much more broad spectrum in their performance, long lasting traditionally, at least the ones that Syngenta has in the Miravis fungicide brand and TrivaPro, and also bringing some of that plant health. So a year like this year, for an example, I get a phone call from Northwest Missouri where they've had quite a little bit of moisture. Typically, moisture equals disease pressure. You can bank on whether that be a TrivaPro fungicide application to corn or a Miravis Top fungicide application to soybeans. We're going to help manage some diseases and get hopefully some quality and yield improvement there from that. But if that phone call is coming from Northeast Missouri, and I think where you're from, it's been a little more challenging, right? A little less moisture potentially. Less moisture typically then means less disease pressure. And so you want to have confidence that you're going to get a good return on investment from making that fungicide application. And that's why choosing a product that maybe gives you plant health or long residual can be really important to help do that. For an example, TrivaPro at that VT-R1 timing on corn, we're looking at 78% of the time a positive return on investment. Miravis Top on soybeans at that R2 to R3 timing, looking at over 90% positive return on investment using our in-house data trial set that we're looking at. So that brings a lot of confidence then that I'm going to invest in my crop, dry conditions, wet conditions, disease or no disease, and have a good likelihood for return on investment versus where we were 25 years ago using just a triazole, for an example. And if you got a disease, it would help. But if you didn't have high disease pressure, you may not see that bone.
You weren't doing much, I guess.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
I'll go back. Just I don't have the experience that Brian does, which it's me calling him having experience is not calling him old.
But I am.
I will call him short. I won't call him old. But I was a seeds agronomist before I took over this role with Syngenta, and I remember when TrivaPro was launched actually, and we had some heavy southern rust pressure, and even back then, I remember being kind of, we'll call it on the TrivaPro train, and how that message was being relayed and the successes we were seeing. And I think I don't have a percentage as far as what the market share has grown in terms of fungicide use, but it has absolutely, it has exponentially went up in the last 5 to 7 years. And I think a lot of that has coincided with that technology that Brian's talking about being launched with, such as a product like its TrivaPro fungicide. So the success is there in terms of people that are adapting it into their farm. And I think the results they are seeing are obviously what's driving that. It wouldn't make sense. People aren't going to just spend money to spend money. So the performance we're seeing in the field has obviously been spectacular, and that is what's driving the sales. And when you look at the data Brian mentioned, this is not side-by-side 1 year data in one location. We're talking hundreds of data points across the Midwest in various conditions over multiple years that we're seeing this. So it's that consistency that folks are seeing. And we talked earlier about using seed treatments later and earlier, and I feel like in some cases the dry and wet year conversation with fungicide comes in. Heck, even just a week ago, the conversation has shifted from, I'm not going to use a fungicide because it's really dry and I'm not sure what my yield's going to be, to we got a rain and okay, now I'm going to use it. The data points we see in dry versus wet years indicate we get a very good, consistent return, whether that's a 100 bushel yield environment or a 200 bushel yield environment. We're getting a really good ROI. And so I think that has been what has sold a lot of folks on the fungicide piece.
Sure.
The other thing I will say to that is some of these products we were looking at 25 years ago, we're still using them today. So there's some of these original products that I was working with triazoles back in the day are in Miravis Neo or TrivaPro fungicide. But we stacked additional sites of action and additional active ingredients that have specific benefits like longer residual or more broad spectrum or this plant health.
Right. Right. So you mentioned, I guess specifically to corn, which is we're pushing that right now. You mentioned kind of that VT to R1 application, which is what as we as a company are pushing out there more often than not. Why are you choosing that timing? You want to give it? I know you've got another 200 slide presentation that you could pull up. But tell me the 30,000 foot level view of why you're choosing that timing, right, to pull the trigger on that multiple mode of action product.
Yeah, so if you look at from that VT R1 time frame, from that point over the next 30 to 40 days, a plant needs a lot of energy, so it needs green tissue and doesn't need to lose any to foliar diseases, and it needs a lot of water for pollination and for early grain fill, and that is what we can help with from a plant health standpoint, right? So if you look at return on investment or the return to fungicide bell curve, that's going to be the peak, the key return on investment. Isn't that VT, R1, maybe into R2 is going to be your highest return on investment. And it's not to say you can't get a benefit from an R3. Say if you had a late southern rust outbreak come in, you still can get positive return on investment. But if I'm going to pick one time when I look at all of the data, if I'm going to put one timing on corn, it's that VT-R1. And at that point, you got the opportunity, if you want to pair that with something like a foliar nutritional, and you have that capability to do that, maybe even insecticide, you would have that capability to do that at that time too.
Gotcha.
And not only is that time frame when those kernels are getting patched together and we're getting good pollination and all that, but that's also coincides with when a lot of our key diseases are starting to roll in too. So, and a lot of that will depend on weather and how much, southern rust may get pushed in from the south, things like that. But that's where we get a good residual on, and you can actually push us through a pretty good portion of the grain fill period and keep that upper third roughly of what you want in the canopy healthy.
Okay. So you mentioned some of the disease. I think we've kicked around some of the diseases. I can't remember which ones we talked about before the mic came on or versus after the mic came on. But tell me in corn with that VT-R1, what are the main diseases that you're targeting? And I assume I guess to tag on to that, and I don't think you said the word when you described the three mode of action product, but you hear the word curative. So tell me your thoughts, and then kind of weave that into what diseases I guess we're targeting from that VT-R1 application.
Yeah, so let's start with the word curative.
Yeah,
if we could first.
Go for it.
So I get really nervous about that word a bit because in a lot of cases, when I think about curative, I think, I see the disease.
Right.
Now I'm going to make a fungicide application. I'm going to kill the disease, that lesion, and then I'm going to turn that area of the leaf green again. And that's not the way these fungicides work. So can a curative, typically we're talking about a triazole site of action, can it stop the development of the disease, progression of the disease? Yes. In a lot of cases, the right fungicide on the right disease will stop that progression. But are you going to turn that lesion, that yellow area, that discolored area of the leaf back green again? No, it's not CPR. So I get a little nervous about curative, and that's why I'm more to try to be on the preventative side, to be on the front side of the application, and before diseases really get rampant. So more in that VT-R1 from a timing perspective. So that's where I'm at from that around curative.
Sure. Yeah, no, and that makes a lot of sense. And I guess just the logistics, can catch up with us, right? At that, if you wait for, you mentioned southern rust as kind of one of the diseases that you're trying to be preventative. If all of a sudden you go out there and see a whole bunch of southern rust, and it takes you however long to get a plane lined up, acquire a product, and get it put on, or however you're applying it, it may be too late, I guess. You may have missed your window for that major economic return on that product.
You asked what key diseases we're focusing in on, and they would predominantly be southern rust, northern horn leaf blight, gray leaf spot, and now tar spot would probably be the fourth one coming in there. So there's other diseases out there, obviously, but those are the main four key fungal pathogens we're really focusing in on. And, what Brian mentioned, it's interesting, we've talked about this before, how kind of the fungicide message of multiple effective modes of action is sort of similar to how we talk about herbicides in some cases, where you may see a single AI that's doing something and helping prevent or take care of one pathogen, but you've got to bring in other ones and stack them on top of each other to see that full effect. So that's an interesting piece we've talked about before of how those play into one another.
Yeah, and so the disease complex, if you think about gray leaf spot, northern quarter leaf blight, and now tar spot, all three of those diseases will overwinter on crop residue, corn crop residue here in the state of Missouri.
Yep.
So those are ones that we know we're going to have the potential for each year. Now, does the environment, moisture and temperature line up that they show themselves? And trust me, I think we're still learning a lot about tar spot. You see it in your world there, Adam, in Northeast Missouri, and I got to admit that's probably been one of the drier areas that of the state, and yet here we've got tar spot show up in the last week there.
Right.
So I think we've got a lot to learn there. Now, southern rust has got to blow in, right? So we'll see what the winds do out of the south and whether that brings it up here.
Well, with tar spot, you just said it. We have it now. It's not it's just endemic now. I mean, it's just and we had it honestly, we had it 2 years. We weren't talking about it as much 2 years ago. But we had it 2 years ago, and now we're rotating back to some of those same fields in certain parts of the state. So it's just there. And there may be weather condition years where it blows up and it's a huge deal. But I can tell you that from now forward, you're going to go find it every single year. I mean, it's not. I don't think it's going to go away. So
yeah, we used to be a kind of a 3 disease complex in corn with gray and northern and southern rust. Now we're probably a 4 disease complex with tar spot definitely being a part of that.
Yeah.
And early data would show that that's where you really have a benefit when you stack some of these sites of action and newer chemistries on the marketplace as far as performing against tar spot. So we've got a counterpart that we work with in Wisconsin where there's a lot of tar spot pressure in that geography. And for them, it's about what he calls managing the crash. Because tar spot's going to take it over your corn with the right environment, and you're just trying to slow the crash down. And it really takes high-performing products like tribapro fungicide, Marovis neo fungicide to help slow that onset.
I can't believe you haven't said it yet, Brian, but Brian's magic agronomy answer to most things is it depends. And that's so true because a lot of this is it depends on when diseases come in. The susceptibility of the hybrid or variety that you might be using to that disease is a big key point. It's kind of how we talk about Saltro and use as a seed treatment for SDS, and that coincides with what variety you're using. These are complicated systems we're trying to approach. So it's not just one thing. It depends on when things are coming in and attacking that plant and the right product choice.
I think you guys brought up a good point in the fact hard spot's here now. It's just like you can't go and you won't find a resistant water hemp plant, right? And so that's why we've adapted, and our herbicides that we talked about seeing it grow more, we've started to stack multiple modes of action to be able to fight that. And so tar spot, we're still in the learning phase of that, but again, we're stacking those different modes of actions in our fungicides now, building that same benefit, so that as we learn more about tar spot, we can try to be on the forefront. I know that I've said it, I know that you guys have said it. When it comes to weeds, it's not don't kill the weed, kill the seed, right? Kill the seed before it comes up. That's obviously different when it comes to most of our diseases, especially like southern rust blows in and such. But with tar spot, like we mentioned, living on the crop residue that's there in the field, as we learn more, we may have the ability to be more preventative on that disease, as long as weather patterns come around. So that's where some of these first products as well, and just getting more data on it is going to be beneficial.
Yep. Yeah, and I appreciate Brian talking about managing the crash, because that'll make everyone sleep really, really nice tonight.
Now, remember, I said that was Center for Tar Spot in Wisconsin. Not necessarily talking about Missouri in that case, but we'll see.
Yet. So let's switch to soybean, I guess. So I know I think you've already said kind of that R3 timing on soybeans. I assume possibly similar answer here, but give me the why on that timing on that soybean application with a modern soy fungicide product as well.
Yeah. So one great thing about soybeans is, they are an overproducer of yield. So if you think about it at R3, R4, the number of blooms and pods that are going to be on that soybean plant is tremendous. Mm-hmm. Now, unfortunately, from that point forward, every little stress event that they occur, they start aborting some of that yield, those blooms and pods. And so really what we're trying to do at that time frame is make that plant as stress-free as possible stress-free from insects, diseases, environment stress that we possibly can, so we have less abortion rate. That will increase yields. So that's really, we're timing that R3, R4 when you got your maximum number of fruiting bodies or yield that's going to be on that plant. And from that point forward, we want to reduce stress. So a foliar fungicide recommendation there, want to make sure that we're targeting diseases that we get in our local geography. Things like frog eye leaf spot, Cercospora leaf blight, Septoria brown spot, target spot, which is a relatively new disease that your crop track folks have identified over the last few years here in central Missouri, and make sure that we have a fungicide choice that's very active on those diseases. And then again, oh, by the way, if we can bring in plant health into that perspective, it just increases our consistency of performance. So that's kind of timing and what my mindset goes. Syngenta's recommendation there is going to be like a Miravis top fungicide or maybe a Miravis Neo fungicide to protect against those diseases, offer you that plant health. The thing don't forget in that soybean market space is to also couple that with a good insecticide, because most of our insect pests are mobile. They're driven by UV, so greenness. And when you've done a good premium fungicide application on soybeans, we hope those beans are greener and they're going to be an attractant to those insects. So you're going to maybe even drive some insects into those fields. Gotcha. So making sure we protect it with a good insecticide, something like an Indigo ZCX, new brand that we looked at the Grow More sites last year, and now it's on the market this year.
Gotcha. I'm glad you brought that up, Brian. I had two watchouts I was going to add to the soybean fungicide space, and one of them was insecticide usage. That was one of the things when I first came on to Syngenta, I told Brian, I was like, I didn't really believe in it. And he told me, just look at the data, separate it out. And we have experimented with this at Grow More sites, and the bump is real. So it is there, always paired with a good insecticide. But also the other thing in that time frame, that blooming time frame, we got to watch out for what some of these late applications of herbicides might do to our crop. We see pretty good reductions with late post-timed herbicides paired with our fungicides. And sometimes we get calls of, hey, why didn't our fungicide work? And we go through the list of what they used, and we're like, well, this was off-label. This was done at R3 altogether. We just wanted to make one pass. And what you may have lost in your late herbicide application, you might have gained back with your fungicide. So we have to make sure that we're doing things the right way, and we're not getting off-label, and we're using the appropriate products.
That's going to be a watch-out this year. Sorry, Cameron, go ahead.
Go ahead, Brian, and then I'll ask my question.
Yeah, so to me, that's going to be a watch out, especially this year. When you look at the lack of moisture we've had in a lot of cases, we haven't got a lot of bean development. We haven't closed the row on a lot of these soybeans. And now that we've gotten some moisture here over the last week or 10 days in some places, we're going to see potentially a late flush of weeds coming on. So understanding what stage those soybeans are in, can I legally spray a herbicide or not, and what impact that may have to the yield. Those beans.
Yeah, I'm glad I let you go ahead and say that, Brian, because that goes directly into my quote, what I was going to say. And my comment and question is as we think about more and more guys are planting soybeans early, and they're also changing their maturities because they're trying to differentiate themselves from yield, with soybeans being being photosensitive, and that's what flowering. That's changing. What I've noticed, and I was talking with Scott Wilburn and a couple of other agronomists, is you can kind of see a sense of change in when stuff is blooming compared to what we've been used to, right? And so we talked about our fungicide timing, R2, R3, to a certain degree, we've always just thought to ourselves, hey, at least in central Missouri, that's end of July, 1st of August is kind of when that's, well, now we're finding beans that are already R2, R3 now because of some of these shifts and stuff. Well, guys are used to, hey, I can still go out and hit my second herbicide spot because I don't like those pigweeds standing up, or I don't have a full canopy, I got weeds coming out. Well, as we start making shifts of soybeans and managing them differently by pushing them early, that's going to affect our decisions on when can we run these herbicides and fungicides and be able to not directly impact our yield. So, no, those are great comments.
Yeah, just on that, Cameron. So we planted our April 17th planted soybeans in the ILO Grow More site, and we're at R2 about a week ago. So we do a timing study on our fungicides just to confirm as genetics change, are we still at that sweet spot for that R3 timing? And we made our R2 fungicide applications about a week ago on some of those plots. So yeah, that time frame is a little different, Cameron, than maybe we think about late July.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep. And you're spraying a different looking soybean probably this year than what you
absolutely
typically are. I mean, you like some of them, you drive by. I guess you do the old drive-by agronomy, and you wouldn't call them R2 probably from the road. I mean, they just don't look like they look like a vegetative soybean.
Well, and like most of mine are in 30-inch rows, or all of mine are in 30-inch rows. And again, I don't believe I've got some plots that are ever going to close this year. And so they're always going to be thinking vegetative because they're ever close the row as I drive by.
Right. So I got a couple more questions on the fungicide front. Do you guys have a preference, or talk to me about your kind of thought process of application method a little bit? That a lot of these products get applied from an aircraft now, whether that's a helicopter, an airplane, or a drone now. We do apply a number of soybean products with a ground rig, but just kind of don't bash on one or the other, I guess, but kind of tell me what your thought process is, and if you're okay with some of those lower water use rates on a fungicide product.
Yeah, so can I use my magic agronomy answer? It depends.
Can use it, yeah.
It depends. So, and the reason why I say it depends, Adam, is if you got a 30-acre field, it's got hedgerow on 3 sides and a power line on the 4th side, I don't want to ask an aerial applicator to try to make a pass in that field. So if it's soybeans, for example, we're probably going to try to get a ground rig in there. If it's corn, I'm going to, is it a drone application, for an example? Maybe that would work better in that situation. But there's pretty well established minimums. They're stated on the label as far as carrier volumes. On aerial application, we want to see at least 2 gallons of water to the acre and more if possible. And if we're running out there at a ground rig, I'll be frank, if I'm running out there with a ground rig, in a lot of cases, I want to be at that 20 gallon of water to the acre if I possibly can. Coverage is key. Whatever you can do to get me the best coverage is what I'm after to make sure the fungicide and insecticide are going to work the best. So that's why it depends.
Gotcha.
Yeah, absolutely. And some of the stuff we've done, I know at the Growmore site last year and the year before, I've had the university spray some fungicide applications with their drone. And they're running 2-3 gallon of water, obviously, out of that. So I had some questions, is it going to act kind of like we see from a helicopter or what? But they sprayed a product last year called sodium chlorate, where basically we were burning leaves, tissue, and kind of seeing what kind of coverage we got, even in corn. And I was relatively impressed with how deep within the canopy we got and the coverage we got down there. So I think, obviously speed comes into that beyond moisture. Dr. Bradley, I know, has done some research on it now, or starting to. So there's a lot more data to come there as this technology gets advanced. But I think that there's still some questions, but there's good reason to believe that these products can work coming out of multiple different ways.
Yeah. Agreed. I like it. I wish we wouldn't have brought up the it depends thing and reminded him of that before.
I had to. I hear it every day.
I know. Me too, but it's a lot easier if it's black or white, right? So let's talk about kind of the stay green a little bit, because you kind of hear that and see that out there in the countryside. Tell me what your thought process is on maybe lengthening out that dry down period of whether it's corn or soybeans.
What are you referring to in terms of like just plants staying alive longer in the season, or like green stem issues with soybeans, or any of that?
Both, I guess, if you want to address both.
I guess I'll go. I had actually the question the other day presented to me about green stems and soybeans. The grower was concerned about harvestability and how chewy those beans were last year with his fungicide application. But what he didn't talk about was the bump in yield that he got. And I will just say that it's not. It's easy to point fingers at the fungicide, because obviously they can play a role. If you are improving the health of that plant and keeping it alive longer, you run the risk of having more green stems. But at the same time, it's also variety sensitive, and it's also dependent upon the moisture or the dry down conditions in the fall too. So if we have a rapid dry down period, all of a sudden that plant can't catch up, you might have some chewy stems. So it's multifactorial. And in the case where you're trying to maximize yield, usually, in my opinion, the bump you're getting in yield is well worth slowing the combine down for a little bit in one of those chewy places. But it's kind of complicated, because it's not just a one-size-shoe-fits-all in terms of what you're going to have with green stems on soybeans, at least.
And that's a good point. You say soybeans at least, because it varies by crop a little bit, right? So I know some of the growers that I work with and retailers, they haven't used fungicide on corn, for an example, before. And they're used to seeing what their corn plant looks like with a mature ear or a dry ear. And that's their key when they start harvest. versus then when you start putting a fungicide on there, especially one that has long-lasting residual, one that performs on diseases and plant health, you may actually start looking at a little more green in that plant, but yet have a mature ear. So if you're using just color of the plant to dictate when I'm ready for harvest, sometimes that can change if you haven't used a fungicide before. We see that in wheat also quite a bit. Now, the way some of these intensive wheat management guys are managing the wheat, maybe a couple fungicide applications and nitrogen levels, they may be delaying some harvest 7 days or so, which can be an impact for us that we try to double crop soybeans behind. But to your point earlier, a lot of times when you look at the yield advantage to doing that, there's quite the advantage for sure.
Well, and on corn too. In my former life, I remember my goal was I wanted a brown shuck on a green stalk. Okay, and so I wanted that, and I had growers that were wanting to harvest at 24% or more moisture in some cases. And the starch packing doesn't stop whenever black layer hits. The old rule of thumb, it can continue in and all the way later in the season. So the plant stays alive longer, and we have a better chance of actually packing starch onto those kernels. And obviously, if we harvest a little early with higher moisture, you're not going to have any of that, what they call phantom yield loss towards the end. So it's a complicated system, but there's reasons why you want to see plants green at the end of the year too.
Oh yeah, yep. I wouldn't argue with that at all. And you mentioned it too a little bit about the kind of the trait or variety differences. I don't know if you wanted to mention that, Cameron, because I know you've looked at a lot of that, but that's kind of interesting from what I've seen. I guess it's pretty interesting in looking at the differences in variety by fungicide. You want to talk a little bit, or any of you guys can talk about it, but I know Cameron's looked at it.
Yeah, I mean, we've done that. This will be going on our 4th year of doing that for at least our more corn and more soy in-house varieties. Just have a replicated trial where we have our varieties out there with and without fungicide, and there's a huge swing between just varieties and how they interact with fungicides based on the year. And so you can go from anywhere from having no difference to 10 to 15 bushels on corn just within varieties, and then same on soybeans. So like Brian said, it depends on the weather pattern, but it also depends on your variety on how those are going to impact. And so we think about not very many guys that actually print seed guides anymore. Most of that's all digital, and we've got your ratings of your gray leaf spot, all those disease ratings, right? Well, that also, just the genetics, the background genetics that are in these plants have a functionality of how they're going to interact with these fungicides. And there is a huge difference between which one it is and how well it interacts with the fungicide to stay healthier longer and also yield better.
Cameron, I'm glad to hear you guys say that you're doing that work, especially on soybeans. A lot of seed companies can give you that information on corn, but I think it's definitely something we need even on soybeans. And I'm so glad to hear that you guys at MFA and through your More Soy line are able to provide your customers with that type of information. That's good feedback.
Yeah.
And I know, Cameron, again, going back to my former seed days, one of the challenges was some of the more aggressive hybrids we had usually, not in every case, but some cases they had weak stalks and weak roots later in the season, and they were susceptible to going down early. So one of the ways we can manage and maybe get a grower to use a more aggressive hybrid who's running to shoot for the moon is if you incorporate a fungicide application and you're trying to increase your nitrogen usage or whatever, and you're managing for success, harvesting early, whatever the case may be. But you can incorporate a fungicide and help mitigate some of that risk into the year.
Yep, absolutely. I mean, that just goes back to us, trying to have a cropping plan, right? And so when we go into the year having a cropping plan and having an idea, I mean, there's a reason why it's called a plan because it can change, but having an idea of, hey, I'm going to go with this variety because it's aggressive and I want to, try to shoot the moon. But I know that if I'm going to go with this one, I have to budget and make sure I'm planning for a fungicide on that acre. And so I can't fault that one because we know that we're going to see results with this variety and this fungicide compared to maybe we have variety Y that, hey, if the year is right, we can get away without a fungicide and have no issues. But we know variety X absolutely needs a fungicide no matter what.
Yep, that's good stuff. Like I said, I thought it was good to bring it up just because we talked a little bit about those varietal differences. And, I know in the industry we know that corn is not corn and beans are not always beans. But the drive-by agronomy thing, it's not always super apparent as you're driving up and down the road. So what do we miss on the fungicide front? Because I'm going to do the same thing I do to lots of folks, which is ask you kind of the new products question, and when you're coming out with a new herbicide mode of action to help all of us, right? That's a joke, but
because we were chuckling.
But I guess before we get off of fungicides too far, is there anything that we kind of missed or didn't cover in there?
One thing I would mention, and Adam, you mentioned it earlier, is if you look at the date on the calendar or the development of the crop, whether it's corn or soybeans in Missouri, we're getting into a pretty important time frame for making a fungicide application. Mm-hmm. So it's really important to be having that conversation with your supplier, with your MFA location. They are working to get maybe aerial application to come into the area, and they can get you on that list and make that application happen. So timeliness is key right now.
Yeah, I'm glad Brian brought that up because that's exactly what I was going to bring up. I've had several conversations with some MFA location managers in the last couple of weeks that were worried about if this cuts loose, being able to schedule everything timely. These planes aren't always in the same exact location they need to be when a grower may want it. So I think communication is key, as it is with everything in life.
Yeah, and just the logistics of that, I guess, a lot of those aerial applicators don't live there, right? They're following that crop progression throughout the Midwest. And so if you don't catch them at the right time or while they're there, you're moving on to a different supplier and they may have a different lead time, and it gets complicated real quick in that world. So absolutely. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about new products. What do you guys have kind of in the pipeline or coming out in the next year or two?
That's one of the things
you're allowed to talk about.
That you're allowed to talk about.
Or that you're not allowed to talk about. I'm good with that too.
Well, thanks for that reminder, Cameron. Appreciate that. So, one of the neat things about working for Syngenta is innovation is part of our core, and bringing new products to the marketplace. And that's evident when you start thinking about the Grow More sites. And part of the reason we initiated the Grow More sites 10 years ago was to give customers the opportunity to see new brands before we asked them to pay for them. See them and perform in a demonstration. So we move forward. We've had a recent history of things like Acheron GT herbicide, post-emerge on corn, and Tendovo herbicide, pre-emerge on soybeans, and the Indigo ZCX, new insecticide for soybean insect control. Big product that we're really looking at and launching, really, if you want to think about it that way, at the Grow More site. And it is registered federally, and it is registered in the state of Missouri and Kansas. We can speak to that. Okay, Cameron, so I don't think we're going to get anybody in too much trouble here, but new corn herbicide, pre-emerge herbicide called Storin. Really excited about it. Now, unfortunately, Adam, it's not new mode of action. Okay, so it's not that chemistry. By the way, if you've got that in your backyard, let me know. We'll work with you.
I don't know that you'd be my first call. I'm sorry.
Darn. But we're really excited about what Storin can do because for our geography, we think about tough to control weeds, and especially if we think about water hemp or Palmer amaranth. Very difficult, and I believe the numbers around 40% of all growers say that they're struggling to control those weed species on their farm. So what can we do to be more consistent with that control, or what can we do to give longer control? We've got pretty effective lineup currently in corn herbicides, things like Acheron Flexi herbicide, but Storin will take that level of performance to the higher level, and looking at longer lasting residual as well as more consistent control, especially against those tough control weeds like water hemp. So we're pairing multiple group 15s together from a site of action perspective, and pairing multiple group 27s together from a site of action. So now you've got active ingredients that may fall in the same site of action, but they have different physical properties. So different solubility, different absorptivity to the soil, different half-life. So more consistent performance was what we've seen out of Storin.
And I'll add, if we can pick up an extra, let's just say 3 to 5% or whatever of amaranthus control, that may not sound like a lot to a grower or anybody we work with on a day-to-day basis, but that can be a lot in a field. And when water hemp can produce millions of seeds per plant, that's a big deal. And when you start stacking those active ingredients on, we talked earlier about the difference per year in the physical properties of some of these chemistries. It's something we started talking a lot about, 2 years ago probably, when we started adding the two different group 27s together that make Acheron. the difference in performance we get there is next level. And so now when we stack that together with 2 different Group 15 herbicides together, we're expecting that same increase in level of control. So it's really exciting to be able to stack 4 different active ingredients together in the same manner.
Yeah. Gotcha. Cool. Sounds good. Anything else you want to mention that's kind of further out, or something in the background that you guys are kind of excited about? I'm gonna keep asking until you give me something.
Well, there's a lot of companies that are always looking for that new mode of action, sure. And just like Syngenta is. So I don't know that there's anything in the near term you're going to see there, but we will continue to do our research and development just like a lot of other companies will. And we're excited about new product concepts as they come forward. And hopefully the Grow More site will be the first place you'll get to see those products.
I don't know how important you think we are, but we're not.
That was a great political answer for Brian.
Yeah, it was. It was. No, I like it, guys, and I appreciate that. And we as a retailer see those kind of things in a company too. I mean, we can kind of see through the lens a little bit and see that which companies are working on things, and we know that you guys are. So appreciate that.
We've had something every single year I've been here to talk about that's been new.
Absolutely,
which has been a lot of fun at the Grow More sites. It's always fun to have something new and be able to have that conversation, just because it shows that innovation piece Brian's talking about.
Sure.
Well, then the Grow More site really allows us to dial it down specifically. Okay, do you want to use the new Storm corn herbicide try to use it as a 1-pass option, or based on your weed pressure and your weed density, do you need to look at it in a split shot option or a 2-pass program, which in most cases 2 passes overlapping retailers is going to be more effective weed control. So, but it allows us locally to look at how to utilize these products and do that like yourselves, your retail locations.
Yeah, absolutely. Guys, what did we miss today? Before we get too far, I just want to say I appreciate you guys taking the time to come in and talk to us today. Appreciate the partnership that we have with Syngenta. Wouldn't have asked you in here if we didn't really respect that. So definitely thanks to you two for coming in today. So
we'll appreciate the invitation. Enjoy your podcast. Both Brandon and I get a lot of time up and down the road. It's really fun to listen to. I always learn a lot.
Yeah, good.
Certainly appreciate it. Looking forward to hearing my voice and seeing how bad I sound.
Oh, that's not true. Because if people are willing to listen to me for more than 15 seconds, I think you're going to be in good shape. Cameron, you got anything else?
I appreciate you guys joining on with us today and the partnership that we have.
Yep. Well, thanks again to you guys. Thanks to everybody that took the time to listen, and we'll talk to you next episode.
Thanks for listening to Made for Agriculture. Email comments and questions to podcast@mfa-inc.com.